Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed prominently on the YouTube channel homepage, but as you'll also see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. And today's question of doom, I have to admit, is another late addition to the inbox. There is still quite a pile of questions of dooms to go through, but this one I simply couldn't resist answering sooner rather than later because, first of all, it's got pictures. Now, pictures appeal to me. Call me childish, but I love a good picture book. And secondly, in all seriousness, it's actually quite a good little case study. So hopefully you'll enjoy this, even if you are waiting on your question to be answered. The question goes as follows. Hello, Mr. Soup. This person seems incredulous if that's my real name. I thoroughly enjoy your videos and look forward to them when they come out. I was wondering if you could give me an opinion. I'm working on my own little dig at the site of a farm, house and barn, that existed from about 1835, and on an 1868 map is abandoned, and by a 1906 map no longer shown, no longer present, well, no longer there. Instead of starting at the barn or house, I started by a medium-sized erratic. Now, an erratic is normally a boulder that's been moved, typically through glacial action. So it's a boulder, it's a piece of rock that's foreign to the landscape where it finds itself now, and it was probably dropped there by a melting glacier, like 10,000 years ago or something. Going down about 6 centimetres, I found a feature I believe to be from a fire. You can see the charcoal type reflection when you look at it in the right way of the feature in some photos. How old do you think this feature might be? It is 6 centimetres deep, or 6 centimetres brackets. I think maybe 100 years. Some say it could be 500 years. However, I think that's ridiculous. But I think closer maybe to 50 years. It's a relatively quiet woods that has at least 2.5 to 3 centimetres of duff on it. That's probably leaf litter. So the leaf that's the material that's dropped and deposited annually, or at least annually, by trees. Well, it's being constantly dropped, really, isn't it? And down to about 3 centimetres and 3.5 centimetres of sandy soil surrounding the feature. Within what I excavated, I found a cherry pit and coarse earthenware. I haven't excavated down to see how far the feature goes, but it is on the southwest side of the erratic, and there's a large chunk that looks broken off. In any case, I know you're busy, but if you give me your opinion or some guidance on time and depth of soil, I would appreciate it. Thanks. Be well, Rich. Well, Rich, you, my good friend, ask a very interesting question, and this question is one which I'm sorry to say I cannot give you a definitive answer for, but I will explain. I will explain why I cannot simply answer your question. First of all, you're quite right. I think going by the photos, that looks like it could potentially be a patch of burning. Of course, there are other reasons for discoloured soil, but I trust your instinct, in so much as one has to really be present to look at and see this material to make a decision on whether or not it's charcoal. Usually, charcoal is very friable, it breaks apart in the fingers. In fact, some people have the experience that when you pick up charcoal from soil and you sort of squish it a little bit, it sort of almost seems to disappear. So actually charcoal flecks, especially in soil, as some evidence of burning, in particular in prehistoric settings, can be so ephemeral that actually it's almost as though a bonfire was burning and little bits of ash landed and then were sort of sealed in soil. So my point is, yes, it looks like it could be burning, and I will trust your judgment on whether or not it's charcoal. Nice photos, by the way. I really like all the information you've got going. It's like Terminator, but for archaeology. It's like anyway, sorry, Total Station Terminator. However, the problem here is that depth is no measure of age. Now, before any young Earth or sort of recent dinosaur fans go off celebrating and say, "Ha ha, ha ha ha, stratigraphy means nothing," that is not what I'm saying. But there is an element of depth means age. If you go down 20 feet, something's happened in terms of time. But what I'm getting at is that the specific depth of, for example, especially living horizons, or sorry, human horizons, surfaces where people have been living in a landscape. The specific depth of that is no guarantee of recent or ancient activity. Now, the reason for this is that it depends on so many factors and variables, in particular in a woodland environment. But you can't guarantee how much material has been laid down over time, and also how much of that material has been subsequently blown off, removed, dug out by animals, excavated by human action, blown away by wind, been subject to burning through forest fires, this kind of thing. There's so many variables to take into account that when you're looking at essentially a living soil layer, as opposed to say maybe 30 feet, 30 meters down or something, or even 5 meters down, a layer where actually there's lots of biological activity still. And if you're talking at depth of around 6 centimeters, then this is very much within the living soil. Then actually it becomes impossible to use soil depth as an adequate measure, because there's so many things, as I say, that are happening to both add to that soil but also to take from that soil layer, constantly ongoing, that depth can be variable for various reasons. Now, what's interesting here, though, is that this is part of the very same process that we rely upon to really, especially geologists rely upon, to have a sense of how old older layers are. And I'm talking about here a sort of the universality of these processes. It is kind of ironic that we sort of take for granted that these processes in this sort of depth of soil have such variability, and yet we rely on those processes and the stratigraphy that they produce to adequately date other sites, finds, and also, for example, geology. But the thing is, in archaeology, where even though this soil is being built up by those processes, we don't just date the stratigraphy by depth or even the layer in terms of subsequent build-up. So maybe there's a change in soil color or something. We rely upon material from within those layers to date everything inside the layer. A very simple version of this would be, for example, a coin. So if there's a brown layer, a yellow layer, a brown layer, and in the yellow layer there's a coin from the early 2nd century AD, then we have a sense that maybe the yellow layer is a Roman layer. And that, this is very simple, a very simple case study. But unless the point is, it's complicated. It's complicated. But we do have good techniques for dating. And the best technique for dating a fire pit feature, such as the one that you think you may well have, would in fact be carbon-14 dating, or radiocarbon dating. In other cases, for example, in some archaeological sites, for example, in Africa, techniques such as thermoluminescence, and I'll leave a link to a video on that at the end of this video, are employed to date in particular the rocks within a layer where bones have been found, for example. So again, we're not relying upon depth. Depth is an indicator, but to date that particular strata or that particular depth, we're relying on specific dating, either evidence in the case of coins or techniques in the case of radiocarbon, or for example rocks in the case of thermoluminescence. Now, I recently highlighted a fairly good case study for this slightly counterintuitive relationship between soil depth and raw time depth when I visited Eston Hills, the site near Middlesbrough. That is most certainly a prehistoric site, and not only do the features which are in the landscape reveal that, but also now certainly it's been confirmed that the material and the features which were being excavated are from order of magnitude thousands of years ago. And yet they only really went down to a depth of maximum 20-30 centimetres. This is because the landscape that, for example, the Neolithic hearths are in, or that the Mesolithic flints, which were on the surface of the soil, in fact, this landscape is a living landscape. So animals are passing through it, weather is washing over it. Unfortunately, people are burning the gorse bushes on the site, which has an effect. The whole landscape is again, it's in that boundary of actually still being a living surface, and yet it is thousands of years old. Certainly those horizons where people were living, for example in the Neolithic, in the Bronze Age, we think, certainly in the Mesolithic, this stuff is fairly close to the surface, but it's still very old indeed. So once again, depth in the soil is a good overall indicator that stuff is old, especially if you find something like a meter down, that's going to be old, you know. But being close to the surface is no guarantee of it being recent. And maybe that's the best way to think of it. It's not that everything's up in the air, it's just that every case study is different. And if something is close to the surface, it doesn't mean it happened yesterday. Then again, it might mean it happened yesterday. So, in summary, technically, the material that you've shown us in your photos and that you've described could date to anywhere from 10 years to 10,000 years ago. It really has to come down to some proper dating techniques. And this really illustrates why and how archaeologists have to proceed carefully. This is one of the reasons why we take samples, in particular, of burnt material when we can, but also biological material, and also actually things like coins and other datable materials, because they're so valuable for actually making sense of what it is that we're uncovering. Yes, there is that universality of geological processes, and in many respects you can rely, for example, on flooding events and on certain understandable soil production mechanics to develop an archaeological site in a fairly regular way. But that's only a sort of a broad, I suppose, a broad textbook level understanding. Every site is different, and quite often you'll find, as I say, for example, at Eston Hills, prehistoric material really close to the surface. But that in no way negates its status as being prehistoric. It just means that that's the geology of the area. So ideally, this material would be examined in a lab to ascertain a date, and it would be fascinating to see this sort of site in person as it develops. Perhaps actually just keep on sending photos my way. I'm intrigued. Anyway, hopefully this has been a useful answer to your question, and indeed, hopefully this has illustrated an interesting case study for people out there who are interested in similar issues, similar problems. Because as I say, it can be incredibly counterintuitive to think that it is entirely possible to have at the same depth something from 10,000 years ago and something that happened within the last decade. It is entirely possible over the course of a 20 metre square plot of land. So once again, thank you so much to Rich for that question, which was rich with possibilities. And as ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.